A couple of weeks ago, I reviewed the game Gettysburg by Mark Herman. It is a game that comes with the last issue of the C3i magazine. Great value for your money because you get the magazine and Mark Herman's game, and there is even another game. Two games come with this issue. The other game is The Battle of Issy by Frederick Bay and it's a game in the Days of Glory system. It is a system that I played in the past, although it has been a while. I had to read the manual to become familiar with the rules again. But I used to play it back in the day. I played several games in the system, and I had to tell you, it is my favorite game for Napoleonic warfare. It is a cheat pool game so because of that, is very friendly to the solitaire player. You don't know what's going to happen next. It has just enough complexity to really give you a lot of detail, a lot of interesting situations, a lot of incentives to really play according to the possibilities offered by the battlefield, while at the same time remaining manageable, while at the same time not being hardcore. So I was pretty excited that I was going to play another game in the same system. Also, the battle is pretty interesting. I don't think it's a subject that is covered very often in wargaming, or at the very least I never played a game about the Battle of Issy before, which is the very last battle of the Napoleonic age. We tend to think of Waterloo. Well, guess what? The Emperor wasn't even there anymore, and yet French and Prussian forces still found reasons to fight against each other in this one last battle. Let me show you how the Battle of Issy works. The game is played on this map, which is printed on paper, but it only has a single fold in the middle. It's a fairly small map, and so as you can see, it lays down flat on the table easily without needing to put a piece of plexiglass on it. With the game, so you get this beautiful map, you get a double-sided player aid, you get a rule book, of course, otherwise what are we talking about, and then you get counters. These are the counters that come with the game. Well, these ones are from the Gettysburg game. These are the ones that you use in the game. There are counters representing units and then different markers to indicate if a formation is in square, if it has orders, that kind of stuff. Also, we have activation markers. The counter trait that you see here is not included in the game. Also, what is not included is an opaque container that you will use to place activation markers in it, so that then you can draw them blindly and randomly. As for the units that we have in the game, you have a band on top indicating the formation that the unit belongs to, and then a lot of other information. Here, bottom left corner, the combat strength of the unit. Then we have the cohesion value, movement value, and very small up there, engagement value. Engagement and cohesion are used mainly to take tests. That is, before certain actions, you may have to take an engagement test to see if you're actually able to engage in shock combat or charge combat, or a cohesion test. The tests for the two things are exactly the same. You roll a 10-sided die, not included, you have to add that. You roll a 10-sided die, you add or subtract possible modifiers, and if the result is equal to or lower than your engagement or cohesion, then you pass the engagement or cohesion test that you were taking. Units also are double-sided. They have a disorganized side with worse values, and that is also indicated by a white stripe. In this game, you mainly have infantry with some artillery units here and there, and very little presence of cavalry. This is important because each game of the Napoleonic age, of course, will have a lot of rules about square and charges and movement of cavalry before melee combat, etc., etc., etc. The beauty of this game is that if you're new to the system, you can skip every rule that has to do with cavalry when you first read the rule book. Set up the game, you play a turn or two, and then you go back and read those rules. I don't think that will change much. The game, in fact, is pretty much based on the basic rules of the Days of Glory system, with not a lot of other fancy stuff going on. I would say that the most significant, unique rules that you find here, specific for this battle, is the use of skirmishers, that I don't remember from other games in the system. But it's a very abstract thing. Basically, you have these counters that you attach to some of your units. They represent they represent skirmishers, and you will spend these counters to force the opponent to take tests, and that's pretty much what they do. Now, the units will go on the map, and at the beginning of the game, the French player will start around this area and the Prussian player around this area. Units go on the map, they can stack, and they have a facing, which is indicated by the band or the formation that indicates the front, and the front must face a corner of a hex, not a side. During movement, facing doesn't really matter, but at the end of movement, you need to have your people facing some direction specifically, and so that is important for combat, as you will see. The game, as we said, is a chit pull game. That is, a number of activation markers will go in the cup, and this is something I like very much, because simply by manipulating which markers go, how many of each kind in each turn, the turn track will give you a representation of the ebbs and flows of the battle without you having to worry about too many rules. You don't have to remember, oh, in that turn that formation activates twice. No, you simply dump 2 activation markers there, and simply by pulling chits from the cup, the historical flow will occur. Also gives you a lot of unpredictability, because you don't know the order in which things will activate. I like that very much. However, for those of you that want a little bit more control, don't worry. At the beginning of the turn, there is a procedure that may allow a player to have initiative, which means a player may be able to choose one of their activation markers, keep it out of the cup. That means they get to activate it at the beginning of the turn. And so they have that choice. Frankly, I don't even need that. I like the total randomness of things coming out of the cup. But so this is how we activate units. However, another important thing is that before we start pulling chits, we need to give orders. We don't really commit to which order we give, like it happens in other games. So we simply determine which of our units are gonna have orders and which have orders and which don't. Units with order marker will be able to activate fully. Units that have the not having received order marker, they have 2 choices. They may activate for sure at a reduced capability, and for example, they won't be able to engage with an enemy unless they take an engagement test. Or instead of just taking the safe reduced capability, they may try to activate as normal, in which case you need to take a test. If you pass it, the unit does activate as normal, as if it had orders, but if you fail, then you don't activate at all. The units can only make rally attempts, nothing else. So you can choose safe, reduced turn, or gamble for a full turn, a full activation, or no activation at all. Each player receives a number of orders at the beginning of each turn, and you need to give orders to your tactical groups. A tactical group is a number of units of the same formation that are within 2 hexes from one another. That gives you a little bit of flexibility. So, for example, that unit there is still part of this tactical group. But if I had, for example, these 2 units here in the back, well, they're not part of that tactical group again, so either I spend an entire order to order them separately, or I simply accept that they will have to take a no order received. And suppose now the Prussian player decides to give an order to that tactical group, and then maybe they have another tactical group here in the back, and that tactical group receives a separate order, if I can find the marker, but if I don't find it, that's okay. You know what I mean. In fact, for whatever, oh, there you go, I found it. So we assign those orders. We may have to keep an activation marker out of this, but after we're done with that, the main turn starts, in which we pull chits from the cup and we activate the formation of the chit indicated by the command cheat that was activated. When you activate a formation, the units in that formation may do several things. They need to be done in a specific order. Artillery may fire. If you fire artillery, that is the first thing that happens. Then units may move up to their full movement allowance, and artillery that fired moves at a reduced rate. As you move, of course, you're maneuvering around, you're trying to launch attacks against the opponent. Suppose we do this, etc., etc., etc. Then, of course, well, as a function or a result of movement, you may engage in shock combat. If you're cavalry and you follow certain movement rules, then you may engage in a charge, which is particularly powerful. And after that, the last thing that you can do with activated units that didn't move or fight, you may try to rally a unit that is disorganized, that is on its disorganized side, or even worse, disorganized and routed, which is the worst possible thing. Actually, come to think of it, there is one worse, which is routed, and then after routed, you become eliminated if you take a further level of disorganization. But basically, there are 4 levels of organization: good standing, disorganized, routed, and eliminated. Now, as for combat is actually resolved pretty simple, in a pretty simple fashion, which is calculate modifiers, roll a die, look at a table, and do what it says. In fact, the game has a lot of unique cases. Do this if that thing happens, do this other thing if that other thing happens, but it really boils down to draw the markers, move and attack, and to attack, roll a die and calculate modifiers. There are a lot of modifiers though, so you need to become familiar with those. They may be daunting at the beginning, but don't worry too much. If you're resolving artillery fire, you use a different table and set of modifiers from the ones that you use in shock or charge. If we are doing artillery fire, then I use the strength of the artillery, and then modifiers based on the status of the firer, other things that may have to do with the target, such as the terrain. Then I need to look at the terrain table. Range, of course. So we'll have a set of modifiers here. I roll a d10, I add all the modifiers, and I look at the fire table. If it's less than 9, nothing happens. Otherwise, the unit that I'm firing on may have to take a cohesion test, and if failed, they get disorganized, or they get disorganized right away, or they get routed right away. As for shock or charge, one of the modifiers is the odds ratio between the strength of the attackers and the strength of the defenders. And then, well, I simply calculate that, and then we give you a bonus or a penalty based on who is stronger. Cohesion, remember there is a cohesion value on each unit. Then there is a modifier that represents the difference between the best cohesion among the attacking and the best cohesion among the defenders. Again, they may be positive or negative. If it's positive, it's good for the attacker, negative, good for the defender. Terrain modifiers, if the defender is routed. Position, each unit has 2 front hexes, which are the ones that it's facing, and then 4 rear hexes. And then based on where you are and who is attacking whom, of course you may get better modifiers, attacking an opponent from a front hex and one of the rear hex. Because you're outflanking them, that is very good. Cavalry shock without charging, or cavalry as a charge, so that is good stuff. And then of course charge with square, that's a different set of situations. It looks scary, but in truth the default ones that you have to take into account is the odds and cohesion. Terrain, yeah, but there isn't much terrain here to really worry about. Routed, you will see, you'll know if the unit is routed. And position, you worked hard to achieve that position, so you won't forget that modifier. Once you become familiar, going through the list is really a breeze. You don't even go through the list, you get a sense, -2, boom, I swear, that happened, +5. You get all the modifiers, roll your die, and check this table here, and the results may be that the defender and or the attacker may have to face different consequences. For example, here with a very low result, the attacker gets disordered, also has to take a cohesion test, and if failed, the unit will recoil by 1 hex. Same thing here, but with different possibilities for the defender. Here, recoils by 1 and takes a cohesion test if failed, disorganized. Or here, recoil by 1 and disorganized right away, and other things here. If the defender is routed, eliminated, whatevs, basically the hex is empty, the attacker must enter that with at least 1 unit, and that is interesting because it makes it challenging sometimes to keep formation, to keep your units tight and in a nice tactical group, because they start going where maybe you don't want them to go. This is the general idea. Well, at the end of your activation, you can also roll a die to try to rally units so that from routed they may go back to disorganized, from disorganized to full strength. But this is the general idea. Activate units in a random order, use them to fire with artillery, move, attack, resolve whatever happens there. Continue like this until one of the players has achieved the victory conditions of the game. Here it is possible to achieve an early victory, but if that doesn't happen, if you don't meet those pretty tight operational requirements, then the game continues until the end of turn 7, in which case then victory is assigned based on victory points, and you score victory points by occupying specific locations on the map. The Prussians want to go here and the French want to go there. Also, you score victory points by eliminating and or routing enemy units. So, as I said in my main segment, this game is a sort of good introduction to the Days of Glory system, because it has the things that you find in that system without a lot of other stuff. There aren't many specific unique rules, and in particular something that is probably the hardest thing to digest at the beginning of that system, which is everything that surrounds cavalry charges, and squares. You don't have really to worry about those all that much. I guess you could even play a variant in which you don't have cavalry at all. But my suggestion is start without that, read those rules after a turn or two, and you'll be fine. I believe this to be an excellent introduction to the system in case you don't know it yet. It is such a fine system, it's just so fun to play, the back and forth, the different flow of the battle according to how the different activation chits behave. It's just a lot of fun to play. And finally, you have a way of becoming familiar with that is not too complex to learn. Also, it's not a huge epic thing, so you can play it in an evening, you can play it solo, so it's very manageable. As a game, however, in itself, this game about the Battle of Issy, well, it is a small game, so on one advantage, hooray! That's not an epic thing, it won't take you too long to play. On the other hand, of course, it has a little more limited in terms of tactical possibilities. I mean, you can't have both things. It cannot be small and simple and large and epic. So what you have here is a situation which is pretty linear because the two lines are facing each other. The game, the objectives, the terrain don't really give you incentive in doing some crazy maneuvers. Yeah, you're gonna try some outflanking, but so is the opponent. Ultimately, chances are you're gonna have two lines fighting against each other, and you may have a little bit of a swinging door motion if one side starts giving while the other one also starts giving, which somehow it happens fairly often. I don't know why. Now, both players start in a position, both the initial positions are easily defensible. So you may have a little bit of a temptation of turtling a little bit. Whoever is gonna hit first, well, it's gonna have a disadvantage, the defender is gonna have the advantage, and so I guess theoretically at least there's gonna be the possibility both players are gonna sit there and do nothing, but ultimately if you have an attack that goes well, then you push into the defenses of the opponent, then you're starting to score points, rout the opponents. That can give you a considerable advantage. And right there, I think you have an incentive for not just sitting there. On top of the fact that why the heck did you set up a game and started playing it if you don't want to do anything with your military units? So chances are that in fact there's going to be action, which is going to be fairly straightforward. Again, just two lines facing each other, pushing. But then, because there are a lot of things that escape the player's decisions, then things start happening you can't control. When unit starts routing, then there's automatic movement, and you don't know exactly where they're gonna stop. Then you have other elements of this kind. So the nice, tight, tidy lines at the beginning become a cloud of people running around, trying to inflict the final hit, and actually getting them recoiling because of artillery, etc., etc., etc. So it's nice, and that's part of the flow of the game, to see how the game devolves from nice, tight formations to other chaos, as maybe then one side recovers from the shock a little faster than the opponent and is able to put together more of a coordinated attack later. But definitely, the action again is simple, is linear, but it has enough to be interesting and to give you moments of surprise. So in general, the Battle of Issy is really it's a small game. It's a good introduction to the system. It's a good implementation of the system for when you want to have a battle that has some interesting moments, has some interesting challenges, but it's easy to set up and it doesn't take too long to play. Then Battle of Issy definitely could be a good option. A small and playable introduction to the Days of Glory system. It also comes with the magazine and with the full other game, which also is a good game. So overall, definitely good package.